in the blockchain environment, so increasing diversity and inclusion into the space. And in 2019, Bridget founded the Bigger Pie, and by improving gender equity in tech, then hopefully solutions will be improved thereafter. And we can develop solutions to also solve real world issues. And that's especially timely as we've just had, International Women's Day earlier this week on Tuesday with the theme of break the bias. So hopefully in the crypto space, we'll see more equality, although every day is International Women's Day. And then we have Simon, who is kindly stepping in for Nick last minute. So super appreciative, Simon, for making this meeting today. He's the CEO of Direct Ed, addressing the problem that talented students in developing countries might not have all the opportunity to or economic means to realize their full potential in employment, even after a stellar education. So we'll leave him to explain how he sees the solution through Web3 and crypto. I think that'll be super interesting to hear more about. And Taylor, we've got the president of the Learning Economy, which is a US-based nonprofit with a global mission to accelerate the world towards 21st century education and workplace infrastructures, addressing inequity between students and employee-centric models, and also connecting the fragmented ecosystem of stakeholders into a unified hub of innovation. So it'd be really interesting to hear, I think this is the first time all three speakers are on the same platform, hearing what they're up to, how they're adapting to this ever-changing world and the volatility in the markets, and also once we've heard from them all, open it up to the audience to any Q&A or any responses or questions and comments for the speakers. And it'll be interesting to see at the end of this conversation whether there's any overlap or any new ideas and solutions that come out of this, the integration of all this discussion. And then we have Maury, who's the founder and CEO of LearnerShape, who's kindly hosted this event and organized it. And then a shout out to Paul Dowling as well, the founder of Mindstream, who's co-hosting and sponsoring the event. But over to you, Maury, to say a few words.
Yeah, sure. And we're recording the event, so anybody who speaks up, you should be aware that you will be recorded. So yeah, thank you, Bella. I just wanted to say a few words about why we were doing an event on this topic. It's our fourth LearnTech event, which we set up LearnTech with Mindstream AI just to exchange ideas about the future of digital education. And so LearnerShape is building the world's first AI-enabled open source learning infrastructure, which means a set of cloud-based microservices to build learning applications. For example, we're building one for British Standards Institution, among others. Our deep tech has been mostly AI, but we've also been looking at blockchain. And recently, we looked at the Cardano blockchain, which has a huge authentication project in Ethiopia, and got the idea that we could get funding through them to do a blockchain authentication project, which they have done. And so we got interested in talking about blockchain, and that's why we decided to do our fourth LearnTech meetup on this topic. So that's all I'm going to say. I'll turn it back to you, Bella, to take us onto the panel.
Yeah, great. So I think first up we have Bridget Greenwood. So yeah, please go ahead and share your thoughts.
The one thing I will add, at the end, we'll do Q&A. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat.
Well, thank you so much, Bella and Maury, for inviting me to come and share some of my thoughts. As Bella introduced me, I am Bridget Greenwood, founder of the Bigger Pie. I came into the blockchain space in 2017, down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. So in a previous life, I used to be an independent financial advisor. So I would travel around the region, dealing with individuals, families, and helping them to achieve their financial goals. So it was very interesting for me, and I didn't continue that after I had my son, which was 2004. It was very interesting for me in 2008 to see the financial crisis that happened, which literally was man-made, and the amount of times that I keep watching The Big Short, because I think it's phenomenal, a phenomenal film to allow people to understand what happened. So that when I saw that Bitcoin came along and what Bitcoin was trying to do, I thought no matter how far we might have to go to get to where we want to, I think it was very laudable goals and ideas. But I couldn't figure out how to buy Bitcoin. Like, it was 18 months, and then eventually a friend of mine said, here, send me some money, download this wallet, and I'll give you the equivalent in BTC. And I haven't looked back since, really. So it was one of the things what's really interesting is the difference between holding some, and for me, it was Bitcoin was my first crypto currency experience, holding it versus learning just about the idea of it suddenly made me much more engaged. It was a much more visceral and much more daily process to learn more. And then I was invited to join the startup. And so that was 2017 through to 2018 that I was in the startup. So for those of you who might know, Bitcoin did this huge hockey stick, went up to $20,000 in December 2017, and then came crashing down sort of Q1 of 2018. And the reason I share that was just interesting of how many people come in because they're looking for a quick buck, and then how many people it brings in who stay for longer. And then since we've had that, we've seen a huge rise again. The peak was in November this time, and we're seeing a bit massive market correction. But in that time, we've gone from a huge rise in something called decentralized finance. We've seen a huge uptake and interest in NFTs. We've got a huge rise now in the way that organizers are structured in something called decentralized autonomous organizations. And it is absolutely impossible to stay on top of everything because it all moves so quickly. So when we're looking at how quickly the pace of technology changes, how quickly the pace of culture changes along with this technology, because people are literally having the chance to reimagine and restructure what we value and how we organize each other, how we get rewarded. How people wish to work and be rewarded is constantly evolving. I was chatting to a friend of mine saying that I was going to be doing this talk, and they were saying, yes, people are seeking the compensation they need, the purpose they want, and the life design and control from their work. And I see that is possible in the Web3 environment. We are still talking about a need for education for mass adoption in this space, which is key, along with improved tech, because it can still be fundamentally difficult to be able to get yourself into a project or investment or vote for something because you have to hold the right currencies, and that's still really quite a difficult process, and depending on the platform it's on can be an exceptionally expensive process as well. But lots of projects are all working towards being able to improve this. We have huge high fail rates, as you do in any new nascent technology, especially when there's quite a lot of money around to fund stuff. Along with money, it comes scam artists. And then we also have a financial system, even if we ignore the fact that the central banks and the central financial systems that we have are prone to letting us down massively. And depending on who you are and which country you live in, a lot of people, when I listened to Andreas Antonopoulos, he was saying people aren't asking why Bitcoin, they're asking when, because they just don't have access to the financial instruments to allow them to be involved in bringing themselves up. So and if we put that aside, the financial systems, going back to the fact that I said I was an IFA, are built for a world that was fit for my parents, where you would graduate or you would leave school, you would have a job for 20 years, you'd retire at the end of it with a gold watch. And I mean, my parents, one worked for BP and the other was a teacher. So they had what we call these final salary pensions, which is just fantastic. None of that exists anymore. And the world we live in is, by the time you've finished your education, no matter what it might be, jobs that weren't even imagined for are in the marketplace. So you're just going to have to continuously be able to accept the fact that from now on, our lifetime education is what we need to be able to do it in the marketplace. So in the time that I've been running the Bigger Pie, which is in 2019, I set it up because I had a look around, and the women in this space are incredible. And I'm not saying the men aren't, I'm just saying that I've done the research on the women, and they are incredible. They have multiple degrees, they speak multiple languages, they have a career history that anyone would be proud of. And they're really active in the space in building something that I think is what the technology is exciting about. And that isn't building by a few, for a few, as we've seen in other, historically that's happened, but it's actually using this technology to be able to reach people that we haven't been able to reach, and become more inclusive, full stop. So what does that mean in terms of bringing, so I look at it through the gendered lens of bringing in more women. I love the fact that both Simon and Taylor also seem to have, and I'm looking forward to their talk, an inclusive lens as well, to understand how we can get more people into education, and ultimately, I guess, to be able to have a more fulfilled working life as well. So what can we do around that? And some interesting projects that we've been involved in is, and particularly since we've had lockdown, right? So this idea of having a meeting like this pre-lockdown was pretty, people just wouldn't do it. I remember various platforms that were like, here, sign up to us, we're going to do a virtual event, and we'll give you 3 months for free. And then, you know, lockdown happened, and you couldn't get couldn't get in the queue to be able to pay enough money to be able to have an online platform. But it's also changed the way that we choose to learn as well. So within this space, there is an organization called Consensus, and they run a software programming course each year, which is 3 months. And they had always done them in person, and of course now that they run them online. But you guys will know better than I do that when you run online courses, usually the completion rate is 5 to 10%. So what we've been doing is the Consensus run the program, they deliver it online, they hold live sessions, they do all of these things as well. And then we were able to secure $70,000 worth of scholarships to put women and men from disadvantaged positions through the course. And what we did is we had a big group where everyone could support each other, and then we chunked people down into study buddy groups. And that has worked really well to be able to take our learnings from being a journey that you do on your own or with a group of strangers to becoming something that you end up having very strong relationships with, accountability, and the amount of people who've been able to cross the line as a result of that has been phenomenal. So then we're looking at that as being part of the pilot for the Zero to CTO program that we want to run. So in Web3, the largest role that you can have is as a blockchain engineer. It is also the most highly paid role, and top blockchain engineers are getting up to $500,000 a year. So not an insignificant amount at all. So we want to be able to see more women in these roles. We want to be able to see more women in these roles in senior positions. So it's like, how can we take women who have years of experience that we can't fast track, but then be able to fast track them in the Web3 world? And I think it's really interesting because the way that it works in Web3 is different organizations will have what we call bounties. So you can go in and you can see what the bounty might be. So the bounty is basically, we need people working on this protocol. We need marketing people. We need people to build it. We need people to test it. We need, all of these things. And then you can put yourself forward to do the work. And once you've done the work, you can get paid for it. So there's definitely a way that you can learn and earn. So we want to be able to build this into the model that we're doing. So you can come in, you can learn how to code in Solidity, and Solidity is the Consensus Bootcamp program that I was talking to you about. So we have smart contracts in Web3, and that a lot of that language is written in Solidity. But of course, employers, as it were, are looking for people with experience. So it's how do we take that learned experience and then allow people to actually go out onto the and have real world experience. And we're putting together a number of bounties to be able to do that. Having a panel of experts to be able to come in to help people and give them assistance whilst they're going through that educational phase, but also once that they're placed in their organizations if they choose to go for a role. Because that's the great thing about open source, is now we have open source technology and coding. It's not the same as if you're going to work for a bank and everything is under an NDA and you know, you're not allowed to see what people are working on. So there's a much easier way for people now to be able to collaborate, to be able to support people through their education and through their entry into and their progression through in the Web3 space. Does that make sense to you all? The other thing that is really exciting that I've seen growing massively over the years that I've been in the space is that, like, I was talking to Jan, who's helping me. She's a CTO, she's a full stack web blockchain developer, and she was like, in this space, 1 year in the space is the same as 4 years in terms of the potential career progression you can have outside of the space, because it is just growing so rapidly. But she's like, okay, so, you know, I'm a developer, that's great. But all of a sudden now, because we have smart contracts and because we have cryptocurrencies, they're looking at me as the chief technology officer to understand what the financial models are. And it's fascinating to see as we're evolving the requirements for all the different skills. So there's a token-based economic systems. What are the various components that we need for that? And there is AI optimization and control theory. There is computer science and cryptography, but there's also psychology and decision science. There's political science and governance. There's philosophy, law and ethics. There's economics, game theory. There's operational research, management science and industrial systems engineering, just to be able to look at and figure out what we're going to do for the tokenomic economics. So I think it's a really fascinating space in terms of what we can do with education. I think being able to use online tools to reach the information, to be able to meet up with real people, to be able to further your learning, your ability, your accountability, your enjoyment, your encouragement, and then to be able to have the opportunity to work in various projects is a fantastic way to be able to take this education, continue your education within the space and to come into the space. There's more that we could talk about, but I think my time is up, so thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Bridget. That's yeah, all the points you mentioned about tokenization and then, you know, the CTO bounties is all super interesting and important to keep in mind. It's a whole other, you know, economy and market developing. And actually, maybe interestingly, when students and, you know, younger generations are growing up now, you know, was a CTO in a blockchain organization or crypto fund ever offered for, you know, our generation here? And I think the future looks really exciting in that sense. I think we have some polls set up. I'm not sure whether we can just shoot them out now and get some initial sort of just feedback from the audience in terms of current existing knowledge about the space. And then we can move on to Simon to speak about direct ed and the other sort of projects that you've been working on. Thank you, Simon.
Let me try to. I have some slides. So I'm gonna. Can I share actually?
Yeah, please do. Can you see the share? Is there an icon at the bottom of your screen to present now?
Yes, there is. So I'm just gonna pull it up here. But very interesting on the education, like that you mentioned, Bridget, because we are actually submitting now a grant request for a blockchain scholarship for African students in both Ethiopia and East Africa. One of the key points that are emphasized in Cardano is that Africa is a very young it's a young demographics, so crypto adoption is very high there and is likely to be very, very high in that over there. But that also means you need to have people who have the skills to develop and use the tools. So we are proposing to finance or set up some scholarships for that in Project Catalyst Cardano ecosystem.
Yes, I think it's exciting as well. And I'll just say one thing. I think it's exciting as well because we don't have legacy issues. And Africa doesn't have legacy issues that can hold back the pace of innovation that's Britain and other countries do. So
yeah, exactly. why use blockchain when you have Visa? But if you don't have Visa and all of these other things, then the point is, the case for crypto is much greater, I would say. Anyways, so let me now. I think I'm ready. I think I should be able to share now. Tab and direct. Oh. Yes. Okay. It's a bit slow here. But as mentioned earlier, it was a bit of a last minute onboarding here. My background is in economics, and I'm actually still a student. I'm a MPhil student in economics at the University of Oxford, writing now my thesis, and in the fall we'll see what I'll be doing. Perhaps I'll be pursuing my startup full-time, but otherwise I'll have a PhD to start in Denmark. But let me see now, slideshow. This is a bit slow. Okay, great. So Directed is, a blockchain-based stipend DApp for students in developing nations. And my idea is to first give you a bit of an overview of what we actually imagine, like what is the product we want to give to the world, and then I'll talk about how this links to microfinance and financial inclusion in the developing world. So the first thing that we would do, Directed, is that we identify high schools in low-income areas in Ethiopia. As mentioned earlier, we have now a massive rollout in down the pipeline, so to speak. They're enrolling or onboarding 5 million students to the Atala Prism decentralized infrastructure. And that, if you don't know what a decentralized identifier is, then you can think of it as an identification card. So like, you have a driver's license, and you have this kind of card, except it's a digital one. So the reason why I'm comparing it to a driver's license is because no one centrally holds the driver's license. You actually hold it yourself. And similarly with digital identifiers, you actually, the digital identifier is just a container where you can add information, such as how old you are, where you're from, and as we were going to be doing here, we can add information on your educational background. So the next step is that we link these decentralized identifiers to Cardano wallets, meaning that I'll now have a way of sending money to a specific decentralized identifier. And now at this point, a decentralized identifier is just, it's like an address. It doesn't have much information unless you have some kind of onboarding mechanisms where some institution that is trusted says that this belongs to Simon Sallstrom, and these are the things that I kind of approve about this person. So I'll talk more about that later. The next step is that we, on Directed, we specify a smart contract for each high school. And this smart contract is essentially what's replacing a scholarship office. Okay, so what it does is, the first thing, it specifies a threshold for scholarship eligibility. And that means we say, if anyone who receives more than 80 points on a standardized exam is going to be eligible. Secondly, it specifies that there's going to be a random selection of scholarship winners amongst eligible students. Because if we say that if you're above 80, you're going to get the scholarship, then we might end up in a situation where we don't have enough funds to finance all of the scholarships. So the only sort of fair way of doing it at that point is to just do a lottery. And then the last thing it does is that it specifies conditions for scholarship disbursement. And this is also one of the, I guess, key innovations or new things that are possible to do at a hopefully lower cost. So what we mean here by conditions is, for example, if I set up a scholarship and this scholarship is for someone to go to university and study engineering, then I can just add that, and I require the student, in order to get the rest of the scholarship or whatever extra disbursement, they have to enroll to the school, like register, and they have to complete these courses. I'm going to talk more about that next. And on the fourth step, we have the donors pledging donations. And that just means that they go to our website, and they have a selection of various high schools or various purposes, so to speak, various scholarships. It could be an engineering scholarship for women. It could be a medical degree. It could be, we have a lot of variation. But the point is that they pick one, similarly to how you would pick a liquidity pool, and they send some stable coin, or I guess just some cryptocurrency. Donors can then get a verifiable credential that give them access to the to the cohort of that specific scholarship, which means that they can actually go into some kind of donors portal and track the progress and see the actual students who are receiving the scholarships.
Oh, Simon, I think you might have accidentally been muted. Do you mind just unmuting yourself?
Yes. Now I am back.
Someone might have accidentally done that. We only missed 1 second, don't worry.
Okay, just 1 second, great. So I was saying that donors receive a verifiable credential so that they get access to a student progress page. And this is what we imagine is going to bring more engagement and more willingness to donate, because you can actually see where your funds are going, even if you're donating across the world to people that are very far away from you. So this is, in a sense, enhancing the donor experience. Now, let me talk about the second phase. And this is where the sort of scholarship application comes in. And so now we're on the ground again, and we're imagining that we're in Ethiopia. So what happens is that the high school teachers, they issue verifiable credentials, and that just means that it's a grade. It could be a grade, or it could be like a diploma. They issue that to the DIDs. So now a specific student is going to have like name, age, but also some kind of grade. They have they're in full control of this. So they show this to the smart contract, and if they satisfy the conditions, then they get the first chunk of the payout. Then presumably this is going to be a scholarship for university. Then that means they register at the university, and the registrar issues another credential to the student's decentralized identifier. And again, they take that DID, they show it to the scholarship, the smart contract, and get another scholarship disbursement. And then similarly, to get funding again and again, they need to successfully show that they progressed in their educational system. So, I mean, in the legacy sort of system, you would have to have some kind of administrative person who has to manually deal with all of this. Whereas in this case, you have an integrated system where you, as a student, initiate it yourself. You still have some kind of administration on the part of the school, but they're doing that anyways. So you're still cutting out like one big chunk of administration that would be required. And you also get that benefit of being able to track progress as a donor. And lastly, and this is something that adds on the, I guess, comfort on the donor side. If the students do fail to reach these conditions within the time frame, then the funds can be sent back to the donors, because you donated for a specific purpose that wasn't satisfied. Well, then you get the funds back. So that sort of makes sure that the impact actually manifests itself. So now, how does this relate to microfinance? So this is a very recent idea, and this is something that it's quite yeah, I haven't developed it very much. But the basic idea is, or the basic setting is, that micro lending is very, very expensive. You're talking about at least 35%. These scientific studies are sometimes and very often subsidizing the interest rates. But even with heavy subsidies, we're still talking about 20% interest rate analyzed. And this is still cheap for a lot of people, because the alternative is to go to the local money lender that are going to charge more than 100%. But what's striking is that they still take these loans. Repayment rates for microfinance is above 99% in almost or in most settings. So the question is, why are the interest rates so high? Well, one reason is because there is usually no physical capital to use as collateral. So there's nothing for the bank to take or the microfinancial institution to take if the lender defaults, the borrower defaults. Another thing is that there's a fixed cost of setting up loans. And if you're taking really small loans, like under $100, then that fixed cost is going to imply a quite high interest rate. So the question is now, I mean, human capital is a form, or education is a form of human capital. So can we leverage that in some way and thereby get around the problem? So yes, so there's supposed to be some text here, but I'll just explain the logic. The logic that we're imagining is that we grant access to liquidity and loans based on these verifiable credentials. So if you're a high school student, and you get a diploma, then you get access to really cheap loans. Okay, so why would we do that? Isn't that really problematic? Aren't people going to just not repay if there's no collateral? Because we can't really take away education from them. But what we can do is we can say that if you default now, then we're not going to give you access to liquidity again. So we're sort of saying that we give you something really, really nice, which is very cheap credit instantly. This is extremely valuable. So if you try to cheat and you just try to avoid paying back, then we're just going to cut access to this liquidity. And so we make it highly desirable, and the incentives to actually repay should be really high. The key thing here is that it's very difficult to get another verifiable credential. It's very difficult to get through, get another point of entry to lending. And that is the basis upon which we think that this is going to be kind of credible, in the sense that it's a credible threat and there's no way to get access to the liquidity otherwise. Because we kind of have time-stamped verifiable credentials. As I said, this is very much in the early stages, so we're still thinking about, is this really feasible? But we see this as one pathway that perhaps could make it possible to do DeFi that is grounded on verifiable credentials. So, the first thing is to say that donations DApp is something that is a first step to build trust as well. I forgot to mention that, but it also sets the stage for future microfinance as enabled by verifiable credentials. So if you have any questions or just feedback and ideas or connections, please do reach out. I added my email here at the end. And I'm very happy to, hear how implausible this idea is, because that's what's going to help me improve it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. And I think, considering the short notice, being able to pull those slides together and present as you have is amazing. And I think your ideas are great. And I think, maybe even, it doesn't have to just apply to developing countries. When you're mentioning using the blockchain to track scholarships and donations, I mean, that was actually similar to Beam, which is a UK-based homeless charity, where when you donate using fiat currency, you can kind of see where the money goes and the progress of that individual. So yeah, really big potential in terms of linking that to scholarships and maybe using an incentive to achieve certain grades or achievements for the scholarship to come through. And I think what you mentioned as well about the lending, I mean, the normal student tuition fee loans that students are having here in the UK, and as you know, if you're still a student, I'm actually doing a master's at the moment as well, but there are thresholds between, you don't pay back anything until a certain time, and then a lot of students, I'm sure that I speak to anyway, they're sort of don't want to pay it back, and because it'd be written off after a number of years. So it'd be really interesting to see whether any of these models can actually be used at home. But yeah, well, good luck with everything, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people here willing to help, and they've got your details. We will share it around as well. And we've got a lot of comments in the chat, some more relevant than others. I think there was one from Simone Ravioli, in quotation marks, saying quadratic scholarships. Now, I remember Vitalik mentioning something about quadratic voting on a podcast years ago. I don't know whether, Simon, does quadratic scholarships mean anything to you or ring any bells? Otherwise, we can.
If it does refer to just quadratic voting, but the same mechanism applied to scholarships, then I mean, I think that's interesting. Quadratic voting, then, for everyone who is unfamiliar with it, is basically where you can vote essentially several times, but as you vote more to a certain project or some object, each extra vote is worth less. It's like diminishing returns, so that incentivizes you to kind of spread out your funds a bit more across different alternatives that you might have. I don't know. Yeah, I guess perhaps there's something about that, but I'm not exactly sure what the.
Lots of interesting ideas to develop. Maybe you get a brainstorm or a light bulb moment in the next couple of days. But yeah, so thank you so much for that. And next up, last but by no means least, we have Taylor, who's also got some slick slides, I think, to show everyone. Taylor, welcome to the platform.
Awesome. Thank you, Bella and Maury and everyone for making the space and time to chat about this. If I had it my way, I would have these discussions all day, every day. And yes, Simone actually will probably be in the background providing some good resources and links. He's one of our close colleagues and allies. And yes, it's not in any way implausible, Simon. I mean, actually, I think central to a lot of the work we hope to enable as well. You are speaking the learning economy language, so we'll have to maybe find some time separate to connect, and I'd love to learn a little more about what you're up to. Yeah, just I mentioned, but the reliance and the sort of leaning into things like VCs, verifiable credentials, and decentralized identifiers, I think, are really going to be a key enabler. And to some of the other points in the chat, don't need necessarily to have anything to do with the blockchain or how we're conceiving Web3. But yeah, really, I think exciting stuff. So I'm going to probably try to really move through a few slides quickly, because I think just the discussion hereafter is going to be as useful as anything. So we'll probably run through these much quicker. This is probably more like a 30 to 40 minute set of slides, but we'll kind of race through some things just to give a sense of our work and I guess kind of how we see some of this unfolding and how Web3 intersects with this idea of the internet of education. This is something we've sort of kind of rallied behind just as a way of conceptualizing how to rethink education infrastructure. Is that coming through okay?
It is.
Cool, great. So just as some high level framing, I don't think this is really novel in any way, but just thinking about this idea of infrastructure broadly, historically having these moments of inversion points, and this happened with transportation, This has happened with, telecommunication. We're in the middle of this happening, I'd say, in a lot of ways with just sort of banking and finance and currency. All of the interesting sort of parallels between this is that typically the sort of incumbent infrastructure, take the horse, for example, they sort of created the roadways through various countries that vehicles then made use of. So they sort of lived in tandem, in combination for, often many years. So the sort of infrastructure that gets inverted, like, kind of lives together in a weird sort of rocky, bumpy moment. And then at some point, the inversion actually happens very quickly. Once sort of roads did get established and vehicles did become more prolific, then, travel by horse disappeared fairly quickly. And we've seen this play out with infrastructure historically. And I think we're at a similar point in time with just education. And so I think that's just, again, an interesting way of thinking about, like, where are we in that sort of life cycle of this inversion with just infrastructure around education. And a lot of our work is, in the sort of center of the bullseye of trying to think about that and provide thought leadership and resources and technology to help move that inversion, however it takes shape, in a good direction that's equitable and ultimately benefits, the most people. So, again, not going to touch on this. This is just some of sort of how we've come to be. Learning Economy Foundation, as a nonprofit, we're US based, but do work globally, and have been sort of at this work for about 4 or so years. So still fairly new to the game, but our sort of core thesis is to tackle challenges that I think many on this call probably are familiar with: skill and equity gaps. Simon, you mentioned just sort of human capital. I think that's core to a lot of this, is just thinking about, humans as the most sort of valuable asset on Earth in many ways, and the data they produce. So again, just some of the challenges that I think we all are familiar with, that's kind of core to what we're trying to work towards. So again, this idea of the Internet of Education is just sort of much in the way Web3 or the Metaverse is sort of this overarching means and sort of meme in many ways that we're sort of working behind. This is our sort of rallying cry in many ways when it comes to rethinking infrastructure around education. So work with a lot of partners, probably familiar with a number of these. Again, going to move pretty quick through this. And really at the core of a lot of this is, just sort of siloed data and systems more or less living independently and not communicating with each other. This is, I think, in many ways what this sort of move towards Web3 and this idea of the metaverse is about. How do we sort of, interconnect things in a trusted fashion to where, insights in one domain don't necessarily have to live there, but they can actually, move, and the data can sort of seamlessly cross boundaries. And in education, this is, everyone's aware of sort of the siloed nature of the system currently. And again, to no one's fault, it's the way that things have evolved, but I think there are interesting new mechanisms to start to interconnect systems and the people behind those systems. So it's sort of core to a lot of that is, and Simon touched on this idea of the verifiable credential. That's really what this, and this is sort of by far the most technical piece here, but like that is core to this idea of using interesting new forms of cryptography that allow, credentials and just assertions of what somebody can do or has done to move with trust across various boundaries, much in the way MasterCard and other sort of financial, players have done in the financial industry. I think we're in our view, seeing a similar sort of movement within education with credentialing and allowing there to just be more fluidity and a more open ecosystem when it comes to where credentials can be shared and what they represent in different contexts. So that's just sort of the core underlying, a big core piece to a lot of this is to lean into that sort of trust triangle. Again, going to move through this quick, but just providing sort of data down to the learner or employee level, like really putting people in control and providing more agency across any system. And again, this is oversimplified, but we all interact with a lot of these systems, and often there's no sort of interconnection points. These things are more or less operating independently. So thinking about what does it look like to start to unify across these systems. This is just a sort of different way of visualizing that resonates with some folks, but just thinking it more as a sort of unified web across all these different partners and players. And again, we're certainly not there, but this is sort of just painting a picture and a vision. Again, this is another way of sort of thinking about it, but these are systems that right now more or less operate independently, but there are, we're starting to see signals of mean connecting some of these players. So yeah, this is, again, as opposed to a sort of fragmented systems not talking to each other, we like to think about, a future of education systems where there is sort of unification across these various, current silos. And most of that is driven by, yes, technology, but also just new means of learners being sort of central. Learners, earners, or employees, like the individual, wherever they live across this life cycle, being sort of at the center of that, as opposed to relying on third parties and others. It's ironic, obviously, we still utilize a lot of these, even being here on a Google call, like we have not detethered from some of these central players, and I don't think we will for quite a while, but I think, yeah, the hope is that we can start to paint a picture where we're not reliant on sort of, big centralized players that are more or less profiting off of data. We all know that at this point, that is a problem to be solved. Again, going to move through this quick because I know I want to get to the meat of this in chat. This is the part I wanted to hit on real quick, is to just think about what can Web3 enable in this sort of new future if we envision this unified, singular sort of internet of education, really, and employment. To get there, what are the core? We talk a lot about just public goods and like core utilities, much in the way many here benefit from electricity or from clean water. It took a lot of work to ensure that was the case. What would those core utilities be to enable this sort of future? And so I'm going to run through these real quick, and then we can chat about them sort of independently. One, there's just connectivity, and this is a challenge that I think is there's certainly progress being made, and internet slowly sort of finding its way into all corners of the universe. Like it or not, folks like Elon Musk and Starlink, providing satellite internet, I think, there is a lot of progress being made to ensure that those that are most disconnected have opportunity to be a part of, this sort of future that's digitally enabled. This is sort of probably front page and at the top of the headlines for most is this idea of just digital wallets. Certainly in the Web3 world, more and more familiarity with, things like MetaMask or Coinbase wallet, whatever it might be. There's a lot of interesting work going on around, ensuring that those sort of means of holding and containing information are usable and can sort of be shared across ecosystems and not siloed again. So we work quite a bit on this core utility of a digital wallet. Skills libraries, means of just like aggregating, courses or learning opportunities that speak to individuals. That's a whole nother sort of rabbit hole we could dive down. Networks of credentials. So, right now, this is starting to emerge in certain areas, but what does it mean for credentials and means of representing the skills and knowledge, the human capital across, either localized ecosystems or, in a future state, potentially even across states, nations, and the globe at large. So that's just sort of this interoperability idea with credentialing. And then, this is sort of a hopeful future. If we put a lot of those pieces together, we can start thinking about education more as something that we can control and navigate, much like we do with a GPS device that allows us to sort of, navigate to a sandwich of choice at a local cafe, having a similar opportunity when it comes to education. So just that's sort of the unification of a lot of this. And then there's this sort of probably latest to the game is this idea of just token economics and new incentive mechanisms, things like earn to learn. There's a lot of interesting work going on in just solving by way of sort of crypto economics and tokens. Again, Simon, I think actually this gives me so much hope hearing about projects like yours, because I think there's a lot of opportunity there. But a unified utility that is sort of making use of these tokens. And then, yeah, that to us, if we can see all those come to be and make those public utilities available globally, then we can start to actually think about an economy, a global economy where learning and knowledge actually is the asset, as opposed to the current model that is, we've seen flaws sort of in, whether it be just large-scale capitalism or corruption going on. Like the problems are pretty clear to see, I think, certainly in the current state of the world. So yeah, we like to imagine learning really being core to a global economy. Big picture master plan, don't need to dig into this, but a lot of this work is sort of mapping towards the 2030 UN mandate and SDG 4, specifically providing quality education for all. So that's it. I know that was a lot packed in, but hopefully we have time to chat.
Yeah,
and
thank you so
happy
much.
to share this as well for folks that want to take a look at it in more detail.
Oh, amazing. Really appreciate that. Yeah, maybe we can share that with the attendees. But yeah, great to see that, addressing real problems, multiple use cases, and big picture, UN SDG targets. I think, yeah, universal education for all is so important, and it leads into the economy, it leads into sort of human well-being, and yeah, interconnectivity. So yeah, and that infrastructure inversion that you mentioned as well, I think that's very great foresight there, and I think it's going to be ahead of the curve and collaborate with other projects similar to yours to really make this accessible for everyone. There's quite a few questions in the chat. If anyone in the audience has further questions officially into the Q&A box, otherwise maybe I'll just read out a few comments and questions in the chat. I think this is, for all speakers, whoever wishes to jump in.
May I say one thing?
Yes, Bridget.
Just thank you so much. Thank you very much for Simon and Taylor for sharing those thoughts. I was very excited by both of them. And Taylor, it was wonderful when you said the GPS of your career in education, because I literally want to do exactly that, map everyone's journey of where they came from and how they got to wherever they did, so that you could click on that and you'd see like a tube map journey, basically, but or I call it a city mapper. So there's different ways that you can get there, whether you want to walk or whether you want to get there directly or however it might be. And you can see the resources that people use, you can see the education they've had, you see the networks that help them, you've seen which bounty programs they may or not have gone through. So it's wonderful to be aligned and seeing such similar thinking and being put into the world.
Definitely. And I have a sort of, sometimes when I look at the credential, identification and on putting on the blockchain and how skills are almost like a currency. One of the thoughts, and this could be a challenge, and feel free to, with putting skills on the blockchain, I just wonder people who, trained in one thing, whether it be engineering, etc., but then they actually want to pivot into something completely different, say law or, art, and actually they kind of want to get rid of that. But then now it's, it's been mined into the blockchain and it's, undeletable, irreversible, etc. Do you see any risks with that at all? Are we assuming, perpetual sort of value there, or, how can we make that flexible in future? I wonder.
I can jump in on that one, Bella. It's just what is recorded on the blockchain generally is a cryptographic proof of whatever the certification is. So you can engineer it so that the data goes away. But the cryptographic proof will stay there, but that doesn't tell you about the underlying data. So that is a solvable problem.
Great. There you go. answers to everything. And yeah, the future looks super exciting. So let's see what the comments are about. Got all sorts of things here about horses and carriages and innovation in general. Someone says, horses are a major vector for transport, has diminished, but there are more horses today in England and Wales than when horses were actually a main mode of transport. Eco-friendly cyborg horses making a comeback potentially. We've got Leo King here under a rockabilly pseudonym, just making sure that we, we're mindful of equating trust with cryptography, because trust is delivered legally by trusted third parties operating under the rule of law. And you can't sue the blockchain, which I think is an interesting point. With decentralization, there's not a single entity or party to hold liable potentially. We all are equally in it together. And then this point around private data pods instead of wallets, or just the move towards private data pods in general. General question. Quite a long question here. James, let me read this out, or feel free to unmute yourself if you like, or I can read it out for you. A general question. So he says that decentralization has the potential of widely and properly implemented to dissipate political and economic power, which is generally an extremely valuable goal for most people. However, when in those hands political and economic power is currently concentrated, especially the state, have a corrupt incentive to abuse that power and suppress people's freedom, and promulgate these decentralized technologies with the intention of illegitimately preserving their improper power. Okay, so there's a risk of, states getting hold of these decentralized technologies, and history is repeated or the problems replicated. What strategies are being pursued to make it as difficult as possible for governments and other malicious actors to do this? And especially here when we're talking about, education and real people's lives and futures of the next generation, it's actually kind of probably even more important, arguably, than maybe the financial system. But yeah, did any of the speakers have a view on that?
Yeah, I think it's there's a lot, and I love the question, and I think, James, it's like central to a lot of why there's momentum now, is because there is this growing recognition that power, when concentrated, whether it's economic or just sort of geopolitical power, can be problematic, and hard to argue with that given what's going on currently in Ukraine. So the one thing I'll say is we have a really great partnership currently in the state of Colorado. I'm based in Denver. And in the short term, I think we have to find those. There are really good people operating within what would otherwise be considered very centralized and sort of powerful structures within governments. But I also think there's really good people that want to make change. And I think it has to be done in parallel with those folks to demonstrate how a transition and how, like, slowly unpacking some of that power internal to, whether it's localized governments. I think we probably have to start at that level on a smaller scale. But finding those folks and, like, demonstrating that, like, giving up some of that power and decentralizing in whatever way that, and I think education's an easy, obvious one in some ways, but, like, starting there and, sort of demonstrating by way of sort of pilots and proofs that it's, better off for all to make some of those changes. But at the same time, I think, that's an existential question. It's concerning given where we are, but I think there are those that are willing to sort of partner and listen and be a part of that shift. Even the latest executive order we saw come out in the US, I think, is hopeful. It at least painted a path towards exploring, crypto, as opposed to just completely turning it away. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's an essential kind of ongoing issue. And I think decentralization in general, I campaigned last year for this London Focus or London-Dependence Party, the London Assembly campaign elections, and that was, about decentralizing power from central government. And I think, crypto has such potential to do that, and these projects to do with education. In terms of linking it back to, real world applications, and they were talking about developing economies and countries, and that the fact that there isn't that, legacy issue is super promising. But then, close to my heart, I did a sort of scholarship scheme after college where KPMG paid for my sort of university degree, but that program was cancelled after prematurely because of central government cuts to funding to the apprenticeship levy. So there are real world use cases where central government funding is actually blocking widespread education. So if there's an opportunity for crypto, tokens and projects to mitigate that and provide a solution for these issues where central government funding falls short, we can really make some real progress and for the future. And that can maybe shift the power from central government to the crypto community.
I wanted to add something on that, on the power, and I think it ties very well into all the talk that we've had so far on verifiable credentials. Because ultimately, most of the future probably lies in proof of stake blockchains, which essentially mean that those who have money have more influence and power. And that is quite problematic given the framing that we have of, the political, what we're talking about, concentration of power, because the legacy institutions are very capable of just buying tons of crypto and getting influence over these ecosystems. So you might end up getting a sort of veil of Web3, some idea of distributed power that is underpinned by actors that are from the legacy system. For example, MetaMask being owned or controlled by JP Morgan. I don't know exactly. I just read about that earlier today. I haven't looked up the details, but apparently they own a substantial portion of that and are in control of significant pieces of Ethereum infrastructure. So the way I tie this into what we've been talking about is this idea of verifiable credentials and reputation, where governance of these protocols is based on your contribution, not on how much you own. And this is these are things that are in the development throughout the DAO, decentralized autonomous organization ecosystem. But the most famous one, I think, is the Reddit subreddit for cryptocurrency that have a token called the Moons, and they are rewarded based on contribution to that subreddit, and they are non-tradable. Or the voting power is non-tradable, to be precise, even though you can trade the Moon token. And I think this kind of direction, where the control and the power is more linked to actual contribution in a way that is not transferable, I think that's something that could be protecting us against the centralization of power through just buying tokens. So, yeah.
Thanks so much, Simon. Yeah, that's a really important point. Thank you, everyone. I think we've slightly running over time. I think someone did have their hand up to ask a question.
It was Jaime Martinez. So maybe we take one more question if Jaime still has his comment.
Yeah, one more question, and then one more comment, I think, in the chat to round this off for this evening, and then we call it a night and let those ideas fester. Is Jaime still there?
Yeah, I'm still here, guys. Can you hear me?
Hi. Yep. Thank you.
Hi. Pleasure meeting you, everyone. Jamie from Canada. It wasn't more of a question. Hi, Simon. Nice seeing you. So I just wanted to add to what you mentioned about centralized powers or authorities in certain countries kind of holding or deciding how education kind of takes shape in their regions. And so I'm currently working on a project for developing countries regarding education as well, and utilizing blockchain technology to kind of like Taylor said, implement this learn to earn mechanics, right? And I wanted to ask because I think when you mentioned BR, I don't know what your name is, but what you mentioned, it's very relevant in those areas because at least for Latin America, for example, which is where we're focusing right now, is historically the paradigm of education has been kind of driven towards that area where it kind of became a little bit of a money-making machine type of thing, and some of the governments don't allow for proper development of educational systems or programs within the countries, which kind of prevents the progress of their societies. And I was wondering if anyone here kind of has had some experience or ideas, or kind of working on similar projects on developing countries where this is more prevalent. No, no one.
I'll break in. I mean, I met Simon to invite him as a speaker through the Cardano blockchain, and there's a tremendous amount in the Cardano Catalyst community looking at developing countries. So, you know, and I think there are some. Cardano is the blockchain I know the best, but there's certainly a lot of other. Well, we know that blockchain is being adopted in developing countries, but from an educational perspective, there does seem to be quite a lot going on. I think Cardano has the biggest blockchain authentication project ever with the Ministry of Education of Ethiopia. So that's one example.
Okay, good to know. Yeah, thank you very much. And yes, I am. I've also met Simon in the Cardano ecosystem. That's how I met him. Been in there for quite a while too. But thank you for pointing that out.
Great ecosystem to be in, clearly.
Yeah.
Nice. Oh, well, thanks so much for that, Jamie. And I think that pretty much rounds off this, you know, really colourful discussion. And I think, you know, I don't know if anyone else has sort of lots of ideas and high energy right now to kind of see through some of these really important, you know, proposals and solutions. And I think the future looks bright, and we can only collaborate and innovate together even more to, yeah, come up with results where others or state actors, as we've touched upon, have failed. Thank you all. I'm not sure whether there's going to be like a final poll at all, but thank you so much to speakers, you know, Bridget, Simon, Taylor. This has been super interesting, and I think the audience have been really engaged, and the chat is just popping off really. I think it's gone into some other sort of topics now, but sticking to, you know, education, online learning, I think is, we've touched on some good points here. So thank you. I think let me just see what the final poll was, because I think you know, the audience majority had some or quite a lot of Web3 technology knowledge. So, which I guess, you know, anchored the detailed conversations and questions we've had today.
We've only got a couple of votes, but they're all at the moment yes. So I will share the results, and we can get on with it.
Great. So it's great to know that, yeah, the majority, 100% of people who voted, even believes that blockchain and Web3 technologies will play an important role in the future of education. So thank you so much for joining me and Maury. This is LearnerShape's first 2022 event on Web3, online education, online learning and education. And yeah, it's been a great conversation. Thank you all, and keep in touch. I'll circulate the slides and people's contact details following the meeting. But yeah, have a great rest of your evening and rest of your week, people. Speak to you soon.